Hello, I'm Stephen Fagan, head of curatorial at the Sixth Floor Museum at Dealey Plaza. You may be familiar with our Living History public program series on YouTube, but did you know that that series is an extension of the museum's ongoing oral history project, which has recorded nearly 2,700 interviews with people from around the world? This year, we'll be presenting a special series of studio conversations covering a wide range of topics from sports to civil rights to journalism to assassination research. We hope that you enjoy these intimate one-on-one conversations. Please subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments below the types of interviews you'd like to see presented in the future. We hope you enjoy this special series. Okay, today is Wednesday, January 12th, 2011, and this is Stephen Fagan, the Associate Curator at the Sixth Floor Museum at Dealey Plaza. And the interview that we're doing today is part of the museum's ongoing oral history project. And today I'm here with Keith Shelton. Thank you so much for braving this January weather to come down here and share your story with us today.
Glad to, thank you.
As I mentioned to you just a few minutes ago, you did an oral history with us with my predecessor, Bob Porter, about 13 years ago. And now that we have upgraded high definition equipment, we like to revisit our past subjects after a decade or so and talk a little bit more about this story, maybe cover some areas that weren't covered the first time around.
Good.
What I like to do at the beginning of these oral histories is just get some basic information about yourself, full name, date and place of birth, and a little bit of your background as a journalist, if you wouldn't mind, to get us started.
Sure. James Keith Shelton. I was born in Altus, Oklahoma, October 28, 1932. I graduated from Midwestern University in Wichita Falls. I worked on papers in Lawton, Oklahoma, Wichita Falls, Texas, and the Dallas Times Herald. After I left the Dallas Times Herald, I became editor of the Denton Record Chronicle. I worked there several years. Then I began teaching at the University of North Texas in journalism. I went back to the Record Chronicle for several years, then back to the university, and I retired from the University of North Texas in 2002. I worked on newspapers for 23 years, and I taught at North Texas for 23 years.
Did journalism run in your family?
Yes. I have seven brothers. When the World War II was over, 6 of my brothers had been in the military. One of my older brothers had been a high school English teacher. After the war, there were no jobs available because of so many men coming back. Wichita Falls needed a farm writer, so he read a bunch of USDA pamphlets and became a farm writer, and the rest of us just followed him in. There were 4 of us who worked on newspapers, and my younger brother was a journalist, but he was a career Marine.
Now, you were a political writer at the Dallas Times Herald during the Kennedy years, correct?
Yes.
What brought you to that subject in particular?
Well, I've always enjoyed government and politics. I first covered the Dallas City Council, city government, and I worked at City Hall for several years, and there was a special election, and the political writer was covering that special election, so I got to cover the city election. And when he became city editor, I became the political writer.
Tell me a little bit about this competition that existed in those days between the Times Herald and the morning news, if you wouldn't mind.
It was very fierce. At one time, we sold more papers in Dallas and Dallas County than the morning news did. And of course, it was a battle on the beats. a lot of that time I was at City Hall, and there was tremendous competition on the beats to get the story first.
It's been characterized to me that the Morning News was by far the more conservative of the two papers, while the Times Herald, if not liberal, was at least a little more progressive in its thinking.
That's right. The Morning News was extremely conservative. The John Birch Society was very active in Dallas at that time, and they reflected a lot of the policies of the John Birch Society. After the assassination, the Morning News changed a lot, but at that point it was extremely conservative, and the Times Herald was considered liberal simply by comparison. It was more or less moderate.
But both papers, I believe, endorsed Nixon for president in 1960.
I believe that's true. I don't remember.
There were some very colorful personalities in the political arena at that time on a local level. Bruce Alger, General Edwin Walker. Did you interact with these individuals?
Yes, I did. General Walker was particularly interesting. He had been a general in Korea and had a rough time, and I think it affected him mentally. I was interviewing him one time out on, well, I can't remember the name of the street, but it's in Highland Park.
He lived on Turtle Creek.
Turtle Creek, that's where it was. And he was talking, and then he stopped. And for several minutes, he didn't say anything. And then he said, comma, and went on. He always had his car backed into the driveway so that he could get out in a hurry in case of an emergency.
And I hear he flew his American flag upside down at his home. Do you remember that?
I don't remember it, but I remember hearing about it.
You mentioned the John Birch Society earlier, and there were other smaller groups like the National Indignation Committee and folks like that.
Yeah.
Did it seem to you at the time that Dallas was a so-called hotbed of political extremism?
It was. I covered the National Indignation Convention, and it was very extreme. They wanted to get the United States out of the UN and get the UN out of the United States. They weren't sure that they were for public schools. It was a very extreme organization.
How would you characterize local support for organizations like that?
It was strong.
A strong minority, or would you say the majority of Dallasites supported these agendas?
Well, it was a strong minority, but the majority didn't particularly oppose them.
Okay.
I covered Adlai Stevenson when he appeared before the assassination. There were pickets outside. There were hecklers inside the building. And it was pretty unruly from the beginning. But after the speech, he went backstage, and the crowd didn't leave, so I didn't leave. And maybe 45 minutes after the speech, he left, and the crowd was still there. A woman spat on him, another hit him with a sign, and it was an international story prior to the assassination.
It certainly came back to haunt the city in the aftermath as well.
It did.
Did you have a chance to speak to Ambassador Stevenson about the incident? Did you get any comments from him?
No. He was taken away immediately and left. I think someone else talked to him, maybe in Washington or New York.
There was another incident in 1960 when Lyndon Johnson, just before the presidential election, was crossing the street from the Baker to the Adolphus Hotel, and there was an incident there. Were you covering that as well?
I didn't cover that, but I was working in the newsroom and I knew about it.
Now, as a reporter, especially a political writer at that time, you must have had a treasure trove of information for stories. And it was certainly a colorful time period to be working. But were you concerned about the tenor of the times? Were you concerned that there would be violence in Dallas?
We were concerned that there'd be an incident. It never occurred to us that there'd be an assassination attempt. I interviewed Police Chief Jesse Curry before the assassination, and we printed a story of him cautioning people to be civilized, I guess is the word. We had a coverage plan that was pretty thorough. I had been traveling with President Kennedy in Houston and San Antonio and Houston and Fort Worth. And I remember in Fort Worth, I don't know anything about fashion, so I asked Jackie's press secretary to describe her outfit. And she let me know that it was raspberry, not pink.
Wow.
But I was traveling. We had a reporter and photographer outside the hotel in Fort Worth. We had a reporter and photographer at Love Field. So my assignment was just to ride the bus, and the night before I had gotten a copy of the speech that Kennedy was going to make at noon. I filed the speech, the text, and wrote a story about the speech for release when he started talking. Of course, they were set in type, but they were never printed.
Do you remember what you said about his speech at the trademark?
Not exactly, but it was something to the effect that Kennedy had chastised the conservatives and urged moderation. I've still got a copy of the speech, but I don't remember the content very well.
Traveling with the presidential party, was the reaction in Texas very positive?
It was amazing. In San Antonio, there were big crowds. In Houston, it was amazing. There were people lining the streets almost from the airport to downtown. And everybody was amazed at the turnout in both places and in Dallas.
There were thousands of people at Love Field to greet the president upon his arrival.
Yes.
Did that surprise you?
I wasn't too aware of it because I just got off the plane and onto the bus. We flew, as you know, from Fort Worth to Dallas, which was an up and down flight. So I just pretty immediately got on the bus and didn't pay much attention. But my assignment was just to cover the noon speech. But all the way from the airport, I took a lot of notes, just force of habit, I guess.
Were you with Bob Hollingsworth?
Holly came down with the president to Texas, and I think he was on the same bus.
Do you remember who you were sitting with?
I think it was with Bob Jackson, our photographer. He saw the rifle sticking out the window as we passed.
Was there any conversations or comments made among the reporters in that press bus about the possibility of some incident, some demonstration or protest?
I don't know about conversation. I think there was a feeling that we needed to be alert along the route because there might be a demonstration or something. I'm still not sure anybody really thought about assassination.
Walk me through your experience of the actual shooting, what you remember and what you heard.
Well, there's a 1-block jog north, and the bus had turned on that 1-block jog north, and of course the president was down at a lower level on the incline, and we heard 3 shots, and we heard where they were from. In my notebook, I wrote 3 or 4 shots, question mark. Well, the question mark was not how many shots. The question mark was about whether they were actually shots. Could have been backfire or something. But we almost immediately realized what it was. And about half the people on the bus yelled at the driver to stop so we could see what happened. And the other half were yelling to follow the president so we could see what happened. But it was moot because the police wouldn't let us stop. And I understand by the time the president's car got to the Interstate 35E, it was doing 90 miles an hour. The Secret Service rehearsed going to the hospital in the motorcade, so they knew exactly how to get to Parkland.
Did all the shots sound as though they came from the same general area?
Yeah. Excuse me.
And your bus stopped at the Trade Mart?
Yeah.
Okay. Pick up the story there.
We kind of thundered in as a mob and trying to get to telephones. Everyone was ready to eat, but waiting for the president. I went up on a kind of a mezzanine and went into the first office I came to. Secretary was on the phone, and I, politely as I could, took it away from her and called the office and told them what I knew. And in terms of coverage, we also had people on the motorcade route, and we had people at the sheriff's office and the police station monitoring the police radios. So the office at that point knew more than I did. My assignment was to cover what happened at the Trade Mart. First, they made an announcement that the president had been delayed. Then they made an announcement that he had been hit. And then later they made the announcement that he was dead.
Was Eric Johnson making these announcements primarily?
I believe so. Then Eric Johnson made a statement. There was a minister there who led a prayer. Dickinson, I believe his name was.
I believe it was Luther Holcomb.
Yes, you're right. I noticed that the presidential seal that had been behind the dais suddenly disappeared. There were yellow roses on all the tables. And I started across the room, and a Secret Service man stopped me, and he said, "We're being very careful now," which I thought was ironic. But I took notes on what everybody said and went back downtown and wrote that.
Was it difficult to balance professionalism with your personal reaction to what had happened?
It absolutely was, and our problem was keeping the people in the field calm enough to get things straight, and keeping the people in the office that were doing the rewrite calm enough to get it straight. Everybody was pretty emotional.
Were you personally a Kennedy supporter?
I was, and I was very emotional about the whole thing. It was such a tragedy. And I think one of the problems that America has had is that very difficult to accept the idea that one punk kid can do that much damage to the country.
Is there any doubt in your mind that Lee Harvey Oswald was responsible?
None at all. I know where the gunshots came from. I heard nothing to indicate gunfire from any other direction. I think the Warren Commission report was very thorough, and I don't know of anything to contradict it.
We're almost 50 years removed from the Kennedy assassination, and the folks that watch these oral histories are almost entirely individuals who were not alive at the time of the assassination. A question I often ask people like yourself is, what was it like to be around John F. Kennedy, to see him in person? How did he look as compared to the pages of Look and Life magazine?
Well, of course, he was extremely handsome and charismatic, and having covered a lot of politicians and a lot of political speeches, it was apparent that he was getting through to the audience always. And he was very articulate, never fumbled anything. He was just extremely good at being president.
What memories do you have of the rest of that weekend after the trademark?
Well, I had been traveling in San Antonio, Houston, Fort Worth, and I'd missed a lot of sleep. I had a bad sinus infection and high fever, so about 11 o'clock that night, they let me go home. But people ask me who covered the assassination. Well, all of us did. And I did phone calls and just added material for the rewrite. I was sent home to be back at 5 o'clock on Saturday morning, and I worked till about 11 Saturday night, and I was supposed to be off on Sunday. And of course, as soon as Ruby shot Oswald, everybody went back to work. One of my assignments was to contact a paper in Chicago and swap information with them about Ruby. We were putting together a profile. So every 30 minutes, I would call them or they would call me, and we would swap information that we had gotten about Ruby. They were able to get the Wayne County clerk to open up on Sunday and get them records about Ruby.
Did you know Ruby?
I didn't know him. He was hanging out in the newsroom fairly often, but I didn't really know him.
Had you ever been to any of his establishments?
No.
What was the general attitude about Ruby amongst your colleagues, the people that did know him?
That he was a pest. He was always trying to get publicity for his girls or his club or something, and generally he was just considered a hanger-on.
Was there surprise, disgust, anger that he had committed this act on live television?
Well, I think of the people that knew him or knew about him weren't all that surprised. They were shocked at the lack of security, but he hung around the police station all the time too. So as far as police were concerned, it was just old Jack. And
as far as a motivation for shooting Oswald, did you ever come up with anything?
Well, I didn't reach this conclusion, but I agree with it, that he had been to the Western Union office, which was down at the end of the block, and was going back to his club, and he always carried a gun. And I think he saw the commotion and he realized that Oswald was being transferred. So he just went down there out of curiosity, I think. And then when he saw Oswald with a smirk on his face, he just got furious. Ruby apparently was very distraught about Kennedy being shot, and he was concerned about Jackie. And I think he thought he was going to just save Jackie the trouble of a trial. I don't think it was planned. I think it was emotional reaction on the spot.
How do you respond to individuals who say that Ruby was involved in the mafia or was part of a conspiracy to shoot the president?
Well, I don't think he was part of a conspiracy, but he was kind of a labor goon in Detroit and Chicago. He was a kind of a petty criminal.
You felt that he might have some organized crime ties?
Not really, but I think he had some ties to people that would fight labor unions and strikes and so forth.
Earlier we talked about the competition between the Morning News and the Times Herald, and one of the greatest examples of that is the famous picture that Bob Jackson took of 0.6 of a second before Jack Beer's picture. Were you in the newsroom when that picture was developed?
I was, and when Bob came in, we asked him what he got. And he said, I don't know that I got anything. There was Klieg lights and a lot of smoke, and I just shot blind. Well, as soon as he ran his film, we knew that he had the greatest news picture ever made. The AP office was right off the newsroom of the Times Herald at that time. UPI had a photographer who worked at the Times Herald and would take pictures that the Times Herald shot and put them on the wire. So AP and UPI knew about the picture. Bob's father worked at Dallas Federal Savings and Loan. So we took the negative and put it in the vault at the bank for safekeeping. And we tried to get an extra out, but we couldn't find enough printers on Sunday afternoon to get them together. So we weren't going to be able to print the picture until the next morning. And of course, AP and UPI found out about it, and somehow the networks found out about it, and we got a conference call from all three networks demanding the picture. Middle of the afternoon, AP came into Felix McKnight's office with their lawyer. And they said, we've researched the contract. You don't have to give us the picture. But we don't have to give you wire service anymore either. So the Times Herald reconsidered. Then they did something smart. They auctioned off the rights to the picture. Perry Match got the foreign magazine rights. Saturday Evening Post got the first time domestic rights and so forth. Well, that garnered something like $10,000, I think, which was a lot of money then. And they gave all the money to Bob, but they kept his negative. So Bob couldn't take a job on a bigger paper at a higher salary because he didn't want to leave his negative. And of course, he won everything there was to win, including the Pulitzer. He just fairly recently retired from the paper in Colorado Springs. I'm still in correspondence with him, but some of the contests he won involved a set of encyclopedias. So every once in a while, Bob would come through the newsroom selling encyclopedias.
I've met Bob on several occasions, and he's very nonchalant about his achievements.
Yeah.
But in your opinion, it is one of the best news photographs ever taken?
I think it's the greatest one ever shot.
Looking back on your career, would you say that the Kennedy assassination was the most memorable moment?
Oh, yeah, it certainly was.
Do you teach it often? Did you teach it in your journalism classes?
Not much. I didn't want to bore them with it, but if they asked, I would tell them. And there's a couple of times the university has had something where I was asked to speak. And
did you have any other involvement in this story during the Jack Ruby trial in '64 when the Warren Commission was here? Anything else you can share?
yeah, I covered the opening of the Ruby trial. We had telephones set up out in the hall, excuse me, and they had been installed, but at the beginning of the trial, Melvin Belli sprung psychomotor epilepsy on us. We didn't know what the hell psychomotor epilepsy was. So we dashed out to the phones. None of them had been connected. They were straight lines. You were supposed to pick it up and it'll ring only the Times Herald. But they hadn't been connected, so we scrambled to find phones and find out some psychiatrist who could tell us what that was. There were several incidents. Ruby's sister tried to get in with a gun in her purse. There were, the first day, there were male sheriff's deputies on the door frisking everybody. This was, of course, before scanners. And there was a female reporter, a columnist, and she went in and came out several times so she could get frisked by the male deputy. The second day, they had a female deputy.
In looking at the news footage and reading the stories, and especially anything with Melvin Belli, it seems like the entire trial was a very colorful spectacle.
It was, absolutely. The first day, we knew they would bring Ruby in, and then the judge would come in. Well, during that time, between the time they brought Ruby in and the judge came in, we could ask him a question. So we all gathered around, and the morning news sent Don Safran, their nightclub editor, in the belief that maybe if Ruby recognized anybody, he would recognize Safran. Well, it worked out that way. We all were yelling questions at him, like, who hired you? Were you part of the mafia? That kind of stuff. He recognized Safran, and he got to ask the only question. And they had changed the name of Ruby's club just because of all the publicity. And Safran's question was, Jack, what do you think of them changing the name of your club? After we got through beating on Safran, the judge came in and nobody got to ask another question.
What did you think of this defense, the psychomotor epilepsy defense of Melvin Belli's?
Well, he was desperate. I mean, he had no defense. So it was just a grasp at a straw.
Was there some concern at this time over Dallas's image during the trial and the aftermath of the assassination?
There was. Internationally and all over the country, Dallas was blamed for it. Ruby wouldn't have done it except for the extreme politics of Dallas. I guess Arizona may be going through some of that now. We had a lot of reporters from overseas, and we let them use our morgue, and they trashed our files and stole files. made long-distance calls to Paris and charged them to the Times Herald and that kind of stuff. But Dallas did have a really bad time.
The incidents that we talked about earlier, Adlai Stevenson, Lyndon Johnson, General Walker, all of this was brought up in the aftermath of the assassination. Do you think that that was fair to Dallas, that all of these past incidents were sort of thrown up in the aftermath and used as justification?
I really don't know. Oswald was such a strange character that I'm not sure he was influenced by all of that. He might have been, but I just don't know. Mike Cochran, AP reporter, once asked Marina Oswald if she thought she influenced Oswald, and she said, yes, I think I probably did, because she had belittled him, and she slept around with a lot of people, and I think maybe that was an influence on Oswald. But I don't know. I think Jack Ruby was not.
At least go underground in the aftermath of the assassination?
Well, the critics were pretty silent for a while. And the Dallas Citizens Council and the media, I think, had a conscious effort to make Dallas make over the political atmosphere in Dallas.
Do you think that Mayor Johnson's Goals for Dallas program was an attempt to sort of rejuvenate the city's image nationally?
I really don't know. It may have been, but it was quite a bit after the assassination, and I think Eric Johnson's motive was just to improve Dallas. I don't know whether it was much of a reaction or not.
Talking about the atmosphere of the city, Dallas escaped a lot of the racial conflict that a lot of other southern states were marked with at that time. Any opinion? Was it the Citizens Council that kept the order? What do you think?
Yeah, I covered the opening of desegregation, and the Dallas Citizens Council just intentionally decided there wasn't going to be any trouble. And the word went out, and there wasn't any trouble. I really credit that with the peaceful integration.
I think it's lost on a lot of young people today how influential the Citizens Council was at that time. Can you articulate that a little bit?
Yes, the Dallas Citizens Council was made up of businessmen and cultural leaders in Dallas, and its original and maybe continuing motivation was just to help Dallas business. Mayor Thornton was, R.L. Thornton was the mayor when I was covering City Hall. He could get on the phone in an afternoon and raise $1 million without too much trouble. The city manager, Elgin Crow, would lay out some elaborate plan, and Mr. Thornton would study it for a minute, and then he'd say, Elgin, that just don't money out. And that project was dead. And Thornton and the other bankers and the leaders and the city council was pretty much handpicked. They would go to a prominent young businessman and say, it's your turn to be on the city council. They didn't have any choice. Whoever they nominated for the city council got on there. Of course, there were no blacks or Hispanics on the council.
This power structure was known as the oligarchy.
It was an oligarchy, but it got things done, and at that time it was good for Dallas. I'm not sure it was good for Dallas blacks or Hispanics, but in that they had a stake in the future of Dallas, it worked.
Did your role as a political reporter change after the assassination in any way?
Not really. I don't really think it did.
Does it surprise you that half a century later, we're still talking about this subject, still debating what actually happened right outside?
It doesn't surprise me. I think everybody is fascinated by assassinations. We're still talking about Lincoln's assassination, but also the curious aspect of this, that this one punk kid did that much damage. And of course, there's dispute over how many shots you can get off in that length of time. He had Marine Corps training, and he had practiced. He had tried to shoot General Walker, and he talked about shooting Nixon. There were FBI and others ran tests to show you could get off that many rounds, and it was not a hard target because the car was hardly moving, and he had a good angle, and to me, I think it was pretty simple.
When you talk to young people, particularly young journalism students, how do they react when they find out that you were there in the motorcade and you covered the Kennedy assassination?
Well, of course, they're impressed, and I think they're curious about every aspect of it, what I was doing and what I thought about. The first question is always what I think about the theories. And some of the theories I know for a fact are wrong. There's a guy named Penn in East Texas that you may, I'm sure, know about. Penn Jones. He had a news conference in New York, and he said some reporters at the Times Herald quit because the paper wouldn't print the truth, and they demanded a name, so he gave them my name. And all of a sudden, I was getting phone calls from all over the world. And the fact is, we printed everything we could find, and we worked hard to dig up anything. The paper was anxious to print anything that we could substantiate. We eliminated a whole lot of bad information the day of the assassination. You know, there were people that said they saw Lyndon Johnson hit, people that said they saw the Secret Service in a gun battle. We had to filter out a lot of bad information.
In the 90s, were your students influenced by Oliver Stone's film?
I don't recall any reaction to it.
Did you see the film? JFK?
No.
Never saw it?
No, I didn't want to see it.
Deliberately avoided it?
Yeah. Anyway, back to the incident where I was called. None of us left, and I didn't leave until 65. So if I was upset about the newspaper not publishing something, I stayed a long time after the assassination.
And your leaving had nothing to do with the assassination?
No, it was all about money, like everything else.
I know that we have your papers here at the museum. You donated those to us several years ago. What do you think of the museum here at Dealey Plaza?
I'm very, very much impressed, particularly with the dignity of it. It's not exploitive. It's a treasure of history. I'm disturbed by the people outside.
Well, that's an ongoing story.
Yeah.
It's been taking place here for, well, really since the day of the shooting. Dealey Plaza's had its own unique existence.
Yeah.
Do you remember the controversy surrounding the establishment of the museum and the years of effort it took to put an exhibition here in the building?
I really don't recall much about that.
You think the assassination will remain relevant when all the individuals, all the eyewitnesses and reporters have passed from the scene?
I think it will, and I think that's where this museum and the oral histories will be valuable.
Anything else about this all this? This is it. Keep on.
I was covering Kennedy in Houston at the Rice Hotel. John Connally was the governor, and I knew Connally was going to go up and see Kennedy. So I wanted to catch Connally coming down. Well, an AP staff member
An honor entrance to try to catch him. Oh. With a king.
It was sort of a package in blue leather with a gold presidential seal on the side. And it was about 6 feet tall and about 8 feet long and about half a foot wide. And they took it upstairs. When they came down, I said, my curiosity is bothering me. What the hell was that? And they laughed and they said, that was the presidential board. Kennedy had back trouble, so they had this piece of plywood that they slipped under the mattress, and the presidential board had a blue leather case and a gold presidential seal. And that's about it.
You mentioned Governor Connally. Did you know Governor Connally well?
Very well. I knew him when he first ran and went down to Floresville and spent some time with him for a magazine profile. And I've got a photograph of me and him with a nice inscription from him. So I was a great admirer of his and covered his beginning and his term as governor. I thought he was an excellent governor.
Did you ever talk about the assassination with him?
Yeah. I was the only reporter with him when he went back to Parkland after he was shot. And they walked him through Parkland, showing him exactly what they did and how they did it, showed him the x-rays and everything. He was hurt worse than anybody suspected. I mean, he was close to death. Bullet went through his lung, and they showed where it went. He wore a sling. He wore it a lot longer than he had to because he didn't want to shake hands with everybody. But it was interesting just to go through that and see what happened to him.
How long after the shooting was this?
It must have been 6 or 8 months, because he was I covered him when he went back to Dallas for the first time, And coming into that big open area in Love Field, Nellie took my arm and said, "This place still scares me."
Anything else you can think of you'd like to share with us?
I think not. I just hope future users of the museum and the oral histories will ignore the distraction of the plotters who say that there was a conspiracy, unless somebody can actually prove that something was true.
All right, Mr. Shelton, thank you so much for coming back and doing this supplemental interview for our collection. We appreciate it very much.
Thank you.